Welcome, everyone. You get full points for rising early after a long and delightful night and a long and productive day yesterday. I think it was extraordinary. I learned so much yesterday, and I'm really looking forward to building on that today. Today we have an opportunity to talk about one of our favorite topics, one of everybody's favorite topics, prosperity. It's an easy word to say, but it's a very complex concept. And today we're very fortunate to have 5 very different, deeply experienced and diverse panelists to help us unpack what prosperity might mean beyond the mine site. Not just for the companies, but for the communities and other partners in this. What does prosperity actually mean? What are the key challenges that we're facing in realizing that prosperity? And what are some of the strategic priorities we might have in moving that forward? Essentially, the challenge is for mining companies to go beyond mineral suppliers to becoming materials solutions providers for the green energy transition. That's a phrase that I believe I first heard uttered by former CEO Mark Cutifani from Anglo American, and it's a profound challenge. But I think it's one that I hear coming at us from many directions in earlier discussions. So I'm very pleased to have, again, quite a diverse range of perspectives on this topic, because there's no one answer to prosperity. It comes from many different ways, it has many different dimensions, and I think we'll have a chance to explore those, and I won't attempt to resolve them. So let's start here with, to my left, Ronan Leroy, who's the head of the mining division for TTP Mining. Next to him, Mayar Gomezia, who is the senior expert for Sustainable Resources Program with Resolve, an NGO. Then we have Hamid Rashid, who's the Chief of Global Economic Monitoring for the Department of Economic and Social Affairs, the United Nations, followed by Andrew Southam, the Chief Executive Officer for Kaz Minerals, who's working in Kazakhstan, among other places. And to our far side, we've got Wendy Terrell, who's the Executive Director of the Development Partners Initiative, or Institute. So to start off, I wanted to ask each of you to give us your thoughts on what does prosperity mean for you in your work, and how do you know when you're advancing prosperity that's meaningful to the goals that you have, whether you're a CEO, whether you're an executive director, or whether you're working with the UN or others. I'm going to start with Andrew. Just one final caveat. With only 35 minutes, we're going to be dealing with poetry rather than prose. So I'm asked them to be very concise and strategic in the answers, and we'll just keep to a couple of minutes each as we move along. But actually, sorry, one other thing. After we start with this initial discussion on the definitions of prosperity, we will move into having the panelists discuss what their particular challenges are, and then we'll finish off with those strategic priorities. So start with your views on what prosperity means to you.
Thank you. I'm not sure I'll be able to answer in poetry, but I'll do my best. Well, mining is a long-term endeavor, and you operate under license from the state, and it is critically important that mining brings prosperity in that long term, and also is actually seen to do so as part of your license to operate. The taxes you pay are a fundamental part of that, and companies must be fair and responsible in how they approach that. Of course, you are an employer, and you need to be a fair employer. And for example, during COVID, we maintained wages for all of our staff, regardless of whether they were able to be on-site or off-site, and treated them appropriately through that. You also have the training and development. Now, you can train and develop your own staff, and we do, and they gain qualifications, and that supports their development. They may go on to other endeavors within the country. But we also have programs for the longer term in Kazakhstan, whereby we train, we support colleges, we support universities in training the next generation of Kazakh miners. And many of these people have gone on to do internships with us, and hundreds of them have actually gone on to become permanent employees. Many will work for other companies and support the economy elsewhere, but this is part of our contribution to the next generation, the longer term of Kazakhstan mining and engineering and other sort of industrial skills, which is in areas we feel we're particularly able to contribute in. We also work with suppliers, and mining companies, through their own activities, obviously create and support local supply chains. But we're able to do much more than that. Our standards, for example, on health and safety, on quality and things like this are areas where we're able to work with suppliers for them to raise their own standards and provide those services elsewhere and operate much more efficiently, productively, safely in the wider economy. International practices that we see around the world that work are things that we can also contribute to the development of policy within Kazakhstan. And one area I'll just highlight for you now is in Kazakhstan, for historic reasons, women were banned from certain categories of work in mining. And over a number of years, we worked with the government to allow, for example, women truck drivers. And that's now created a new a career pathway for women, new opportunities, increases our diversity, and is a way we're able to contribute again to the longer term development, longer term prosperity of Kazakhstan.
Good.
We also recognize that in some of the areas immediately around our mine sites, there are some quite pressing needs, and this can range from education, healthcare, infrastructure, and we as a company are able to meet some of those needs. It can be a careful balance between us and the state, but we're able to meet some of those needs visibly, and this means supporting, for example, providing equipment to hospitals, repairing schools, we've repaired roads. We've done a lot of these type of projects which have an immediate impact in the communities around our operations.
I think we'll probably come back to that question of the relative responsibilities of the company and the state as a fundamental aspect of resolving meaningful prosperity both in the short and the long term. Wendy, your thoughts? The Development Partner Institute was formed to address these kinds of questions. It's what you wake up thinking about. So your thoughts on what prosperity means?
Thanks, Alan. I wake up and I go to sleep thinking about it.
Right.
So development partnership, as Alan said, is at the heart of our work. And community prosperity is the heart of country prosperity. So for us, it's about diverse economies in the regions around mining. So there's a role for miners, there's a role for other sectors like agriculture and tourism. There's a role for government in coming together and creating partnerships to enable thriving communities, and to do that both during and beyond the life of mines. And that's really critical. Too often around the world, we're still seeing that prosperity for communities dives at the end of mining. And we don't want to see that. We want mining to be able to contribute in the long term. And development partnership is at the heart of enabling that. So it requires collaboration between the different parts of the value chain, and it requires innovative, fresh approaches to thinking about what role and how can we work together to create diverse economies around mine sites.
Great, thank you. I think I'll turn to Meyer, and you've got a pretty extensive history both here in Africa and beyond. What is Resolve's perspective, and what have your lessons been learned about how meaningful prosperity is generated, or rather, what prosperity means and how you recognize it when it is generated?
Thank you, Alan. I think in the context of our work, three things really stand out. And the first is in terms which the audience, is well attuned to. However you slice and dice it, there is an aspect of transforming your liabilities into assets. And reframing this, that includes for communities as well, ecological liabilities, for example. And in this regard, and we can get into it later, Resolve's sister organization, which is actually Regeneration Enterprises for Profit, is doing some very exciting work in terms of transforming these ecological liabilities for communities into assets. And the other thing is that this has to be done in a sustainable way ultimately. And sustainable not necessarily, or not only in terms of social sustainability, but in terms of how durable it is. And in our work, what we've come across is that some of the ways in doing it is integrating these aspects of prosperity for the minds into the broader socioeconomic context. An example which we can get into it again is probably one of the largest global alliances for development in USAID history, which is called the Health, Electrification, and Telecommunications Alliance. Not directly related to mining per se, but we're working towards trying to tie that into some of the aspects of prosperity for the communities, but in a way that is integrated in the country's broader context. And the last one is some aspect of, I'll say, intentionality or a social license to operate or what have you, however you call it. And this again is coming from our work on community smart consultation and consent. And not to beat on the drum, it's not to say this is working or not, but how do you transform these aspects of seeking consent into practical solutions for communities as well as the partners?
Yeah, that's a really key element of figuring out through the process of consent what prosperity means for the community. You're not projecting on what they need, but through the discussion and dialogue on consent, you jointly define what prosperity is at the outset of the project, and then you have joint goals going forward. I think that's a really fundamental point. Ronan, you're working in a variety of complex environments, both on the mine development side and the broader company developing infrastructure. What does prosperity mean to you?
What prosperity means, indeed, we have this question with our colleagues and with the communities every month, every year, so perhaps I will be their voice this morning. Mm-hmm. When we talk to our colleagues, prosperity is, of course, is salary to start with, but beyond that, what is more important is medical support. It can be clinic, it can be medical insurances. It's a real need for them in terms of prosperity for their families. And the third one is education. Education with a target, education to get access to a better job. So these are the top three, I would say, for our colleagues. However, we are used also to talk with the communities, and then the answer is slightly different. Indeed, it's more global, and what they ask first. It's a fair access or fair opportunity to employment, and they insist on the word fair. So this is their meaning of prosperity. The second point, it's about their, let's say, they want to share their share of the revenue generated by the industry, and it's not through the cascading of the salaries and things like that. It's more about public services, roads, clinics, schools. Right. And the third one, it's always about their environment. So they don't talk about climate change, they are talking about their direct environment. So depending where they are, could be the crops, the water, whatever. And something that we should not forget is also the social cohesion. They don't want to change their social habit and cohesions. So these are the top three.
Yeah, that's a really rich, multi-dimensional set of factors that are quite interdependent. You can't achieve one without the other, and so you have to keep your eye on infrastructure, on environmental capacity, on education, and on, of course, salary and things. That's helpful. Great. And we'll finish with the perspective, the macro perspective, and we had some very interesting discussions over the last day or two on the challenges at the national level, the challenges at the site level, how these interrelate, and how the relative roles and responsibilities are potentially complementary, but not always. So, Hamid.
Thank you, Alan. I'll just want to broaden the discussion a little bit about macro, and the prosperity in its true meaning must have at the term shared prosperity. There's no prosperity which is just for one community or not for the other.
Right.
So if you take that perspective of shared prosperity, that means you think about leaving no one behind, making sure that a rising tide of mining or other resources lift all boats, not just few boats, and don't sink other boats.
Right.
And also to make sure the fundamental aspect of prosperity is equity. Equity both within the generation and across generations, meaning that we have to make sure that our future generations are as well off as our current generation. And that is a very important point when you think about social, environmental, and governance perspectives in policy making. Now, the key question is that what drives prosperity? Mining can play an important role, but if you look at long-term prosperity in countries, it cannot come from mining alone. The prosperity comes from sources of prosperity is productivity growth. As an economist, I can tell you that you can add 1 + 1. The idea of productivity growth should be 1 + 1 should be not just 2, more than 2. Right. It should have a multiplier effect. And that is where the key role, we have to think about the role of policies. And here, of course, we have to look at mining, what mining can deliver. Mining at the community level, of course, can build roads, build schools, hospitals. There can be a pathway to prosperity for a local community. But it's beyond the local community. When you think about it, you have to think about the macro policies, the policies that can make a difference in terms of promoting productivity growth, making people more skilled over time, and looking backward, thinking about 20 years or 30 years down the road, what kind of skills will be needed in this economy, and what kind of investment we need to make today to make them ready for the future economy. And last point I would make is that given the very fast changing scenario that we have in the global economy right now, and that fast change, the rapid changes are also at the local community, at the regional level as well. So we have to be very careful about what skills we target over time, what kind of economy we want to be over time. And our prosperity, our pursuit for prosperity would be based on that vision, the vision, long-term vision that we hold. It is not to undermine that short-term doesn't matter. Short-term matters a lot. And mining and other communities can play a very important partnership role, but the key driver of prosperity comes from policy making, the right policies, and this is where we have to pay adequate attention to make sure that we have the right policies.
Well, it's a very important point that we've all underpinned our discussions here on the question of transition. We are making a fundamental transformation. This is not tweaking the existing economic combinations that we're working with. This is a transformative moment, and while mining plays an important role, it's a catalytic role, and our communities prepared, or how can communities be prepared for that next phase as the economies move into whatever that next stage is going to look like. So that's a really, really key point. I want to shift gears just a little bit because we've laid out some really good discussions on what the end goal could look like or does look like, but now let's think about, well, what are the challenges, the primary challenges? Are these internal company capacity challenges? Are these things in the community that need to be worked on and focused on? Are there market signals that are unhelpful? Are there regulatory barriers? I know that's a big question. We could spend the rest of the day talking about that. But if you think about sort of the top of mind in terms of the barriers to realizing these prosperity goals, what comes to your mind? And I'm going to go in reverse order. I'll start again with you, Hamid, and let's go through again. We'll keep our time tight, but I think barriers will help us think about actions.
No, thank you, Alan. I think I'll just where I left off in my last intervention is that in the policies. So we think about policies can be bottom up and top down, and a combination of the two. And there, the community needs, understanding the community needs are very important. But ultimately, one question that is relevant for all policy making is that where do I get the most bang for the buck? Right. If we have $1 to spend that is generated from mining revenue, from other minerals, that is the dollar at the disposal of the government. How do we spend that dollar to get the best return, not just in the short term? You can give that dollar to a community to meet their current consumption needs, which is not to say that they are not important, but also you can make sure that dollar is spent efficiently and effectively to make sure they have at the longer term capacity to make earnings. So the saying goes that don't give them a fish, teach them how to fish. So giving the right skill set is very important. And this is where two sets of policies play a very important role. One is the fiscal policy. I'm coming from a macro point of view, because fiscal policy plays a role about right allocation of resources. Now, where do we get the most return from public policy investments? Investments in human capital, in education, healthcare, all of this matter a lot. And this is where the policymakers often focus too much on the revenue side and not enough on the expenditure side. And you can gain a lot more mileage on spending efficiency and making decisions that really give very good long-term return to the societies and to the communities. And when I talk about policies, I'm not just talking about the central government. I'm talking about policies at the grassroots level as well. And the second set of policies that also play a very important role, which is broadly known as industrial policies. Industrial policies is not just about industries, it's about skills development over time. So these two set of policies actually can play a very important role in making sure and overcoming the challenges that we're talking about. And some of the challenges are very short term, which can be creating employment, but also to make sure those employments are sustainable. Because you can create a lot of jobs today, but the jobs may disappear 10 years down the road. So that's not a sustainable strategy. So you have to make sure that right investments are made to match the skills that will be needed down the road.
Ever more so important given the sort of non-renewable nature of these deposits. Again, how can they be catalytic? How can they project toward future wealth? And start thinking about that now, not at the end of the mine site or the mine project. Ronan.
Yes. Indeed, all of us, we have seen on the field very interesting initiatives. However, to me, there is a real challenge, which is the coordination of all these initiatives, or let's say the priorities, and that between all the stakeholders. And it's not only the, let's say, the mining companies and the government, but it can be also the financing bodies, it can be the off-takers, and of course, the communities. So to me, we need to have a kind of balanced approach of who will set the priorities for all these initiatives. It has to be a local governance to manage this. However, it would be good that we could have a kind of framework or reference set by a kind of international body.
Right. Yeah, that point of coordination is important. I see that a lot, sort of picking up the signal from the noise. A lot of stuff going on, but in the absence of coordination, you lose not only efficiency, but you gain sort of contradictions, and well-meaning policies can and initiatives can almost cancel one another out. That's a really, really good point. Mayor.
So there are a number of challenges. One is, just matching the aspirations to realities on the ground, right? It's take, for example, what we're seeing with the Community Smart Consultation and Consent Initiative. The perennial question is, why? Why should industry do it? Why should government do it? Why should even the communities take up this approach? So we know a lot of great work has been done to, push forward consent. However, in practice, the outcomes don't always match the reality. But until we're able to address those realities, for example, there are political considerations, quite rightly so, which make the context different from place to place. There are business considerations which make the context different. And even for communities, our assumption is always that, okay, this is good for communities, but why? What is their interest? Why should they listen? So that is one of the constraints on the ground. The other one, from a more technical perspective, just quickly, is what Resolve Sister Organization is doing, Regeneration Enterprises, in terms of transforming these liabilities into assets. A very practical issue is just even access to some of the legacy sites which need to be remined. And it's not even, in the usual countries you would think there will be difficulties with, but just having those regulatory processes to be able to access that and work with communities to do those. So those are some of the challenges.
Yeah, well-intentioned definitions of waste, which may be preventative at some level, may prevent us from actually realizing the value that's in the ground, and that's an interesting point. Wendy, your thoughts on your priorities for challenges to be addressed?
The challenges, the biggest challenge that I see is that we think we've got this sorted out. And development partnership is still quite a new idea. So the Development Partner Institute was launched only in April 2017, so quite new. And the idea that if we just apply the standards, if we just keep doing what we're doing, we're going to reach the concept of development partnership. We've got, in order for us to meet the demand for future minerals, we need to step up for development partnership. And so that means bringing different stakeholders to the table. It means listening to the voices of people that we often haven't listened to. Young people, women, Indigenous people, bringing people to the table. We're hearing from the end of the value chain, from automakers, for instance. Whose lands are these minerals on? And how do we know that those people are benefiting? So we're starting to see from all ends of the value chain that there's a much greater interest in development partnership. And the fantastic opportunity that we have, and the big challenge, is to harness that and to use that momentum that we have that is building as a result of the massive demand for minerals to enable the battery revolution, to enable the energy demands of the future to be met. In order to do that, development partnership is going to be absolutely critical.
That's an interesting sort of point. On the one hand, you're seeing this momentum that can be leveraged out of full markets, which is hugely important. We need the signals coming out of those. On the other hand, we can't rush in thinking we know what we're doing yet. So we shouldn't overlook the fundamental questions that we need to ask. I think to Meyer's point as well, like, make sure you're solving for the right problems in the right way at the right time, and there's no cookie cutter here. But the markets are starting to reflect and reward that. So this is something the moment to ask those questions in an intelligent way. So we'll finish off this round, and we've got about 5 minutes after that to get to strategic priorities. But what are you seeing on the ground, and in terms of your challenges as a CEO?
Well, firstly, may I just pick up very briefly on one point that Hamid made when he talked about prosperity through, should be linked to its long-term prosperity. How can a country maximize prosperity it gains from mining, through policy and so on? I think there's a very slight conflict that we have on that as well as a sort of mining company operating, in that in some of the communities around our operations, we see kind of very near-term pressing needs, which we are in a position to actually help that community address. And as I said in my introduction, for mining companies licensed to operate, you also have to be seen to be making a difference. And I completely agree that mining companies need to be supporting the long-term prosperity of a country. But at the same time, we can also, it's important for local communities that are most directly impacted by your operations to also see immediate benefit, near-term benefit, addressing some of their key concerns. And I think that's also important from a license to operate. And I think just in terms of challenges as well, linked in, I mean, if, for example, if we were to build, support a school, we could only do that in collaboration with policymakers. There's no point constructing a school that can't then attract the right teachers, or a hospital that isn't going to be able to get doctors to work in that remote area or access to the appropriate medicine. So you do need to do all of these type of projects in collaboration with policymakers to ensure that it brings the best long-term benefits to that community, to that country.
So there comes back to that question of partnerships and delivering and being seen to deliver as a partner, prosperity on the ground, but knowing that that's necessary, but that's not sufficient to have that long-term goals. And yeah, you do have to be seen to have there. I mean, community conflict, community resistance is a very expensive thing. And if people don't sense that they're getting that prosperity, your job will be a lot harder. But at the same time, we're solving for bigger problems simultaneously, effectively. Okay, we've got a little less than 5 minutes left, so I'm going to sort of do the rapid round. And in the spirit of moving toward action and trying to think, well, these are all big and complex questions and challenges. What can we do over the next year or two? What would be your priority? One, maybe two things, because we do literally have 4 minutes left, that you would suggest that we all focus on to address some of the barriers toward achieving prosperity. Maybe I'll just go down the full round. Sorry, I'll keep mixing it up here, but we'll just go down and we'll give Wendy the last word.
Only one priority to me will be education. Don't make me wrong, we still have to design the mine operations to preserve the environment. We still have to pay, it's important to pay the taxes in our host country to support the public services, to share infrastructure when we build a railway to help the agro-industry to make the most of it. But if there is only one priority, it will be education. And we have a key role to play. Why? But because we have to build our own training or education system for our companies. It's not better than the education system within our host country. It's just different with other focus, with other means. And the best way is to partner with a local education system. So by sharing facilities, by detecting talents and organizing sessions to make them blossom. So definitely, if there is only one priority, it will be education, and that will be the key for the mineral industry, but to progress toward a better prosperity.
Thanks. Mayor.
So quickly, we have to reframe how we think about it. It's not charity, it's also a huge business opportunity. Regeneration Enterprises is doing a lot of work in this area, and don't take my word for it. Ask yourself why Rio Tinto is all in, and it's based on a proven model which Apple is using in its supply chain. So ecological liabilities can become assets for prosperity. The other one, very quickly, is we're focused on trying to build demand for community consent consultation. So why should anyone care about it in a very practical way?
Great. Thank you.
I think 2 quick points. One is learning from our past experiences and mistakes. We have stories of great successes, minerals delivering prosperity for all. Also, there are a lot of examples where minerals didn't deliver prosperity at a national level, at a local level. So learning from those mistakes are very critical. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, but we can see what we can do in terms of avoiding those mistakes. Right. And the second issue, I would emphasize a very strong macro-micro linkages and alignment, because you can have a lot of good intentions at the macro level, building roads, schools, and everything else, but if they're not aligned with the national objective, then they may be counterproductive, even not cost efficient. So that alignment is very critical to make sure that we are pursuing a common goal of a prosperity for all. Thank you.
Well, I said we weren't going to resolve it, but I think we've just figured out Andrew and Hamid's contradiction and made it a very complementary approach. So, Andrew?
I think mining companies, and us included, we need to communicate much more clearly with the governments, with the host communities, all of the things that we're looking to do, and from their side, they need to recognise that and communicate back in terms of policy direction and so on, so that we can work collaboratively, and the success of mining will lead to prosperity for long-term for countries, and it's mutually beneficial.
So there's more of that dialogue that needs to be actively engaged right now to make sure we align these things in that way. Wendy, the last word to you.
Thanks. My call to action would be to go to independent organisations like ours, read our development partner framework, come to us, and talk to the other independent organisations that exist around the world that are developing ideas and new collaborative approaches to development partnership. I'll let you in on a secret. It isn't going to cost more. And it's going to add enormous value. So I'm really excited about the whole space of development partnership and I encourage others to explore it. And for boards and CEOs and senior government people, I would encourage it to be part of your conversations, because we need to be setting the direction and metrics that support development partnership across the board.
Great. Well, that's an interesting note to leave on, is that prosperity doesn't cost more. So with that, thank you very much. This has been really interesting. It's sort of a different facets of the same problem, and I think you've really helped to elucidate some of the challenges and some of the opportunities. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.